Good evening. So I'm going to talk about Mahaswetha Devi and her short story Stanadayini, Breastgiver, as it is translated into English. But before we look at the story, you must realize that Mahaswetha Devi was an organic intellectual. So who is an organic intellectual? An organic intellectual is one who is active, who is not an armchair intellectual. You've heard of the term armchair intellectual or armchair writer. Somebody who just sits in an armchair at his desk and writes. No. An organic intellectual is one who's actively involved in social issues, who is in the thick of things. That is how Edward Said, the post-colonial writer and critic, described uh, intellectuals who were deeply involved in social issues. Organic intellectual. So, Mahaswetha Devi, apart from her writing, she wrote quite a lot. She wrote nearly 20 books, uh, nearly half a dozen novels, several collections of short stories, some plays, articles. So, apart from writing all these, she was actively involved in the struggles of Adivasis and other marginalized people. So, she was a Bengali by birth. And as you probably also know, she was one among the many uh, Bangladeshis or East Bengalis who migrated to India, having been born in the eastern part of the undivided Bengal province. So Bengal was partitioned into East and West first in 1905, and then after at 1947 it was partitioned into East and West. The eastern part went to Pakistan and the western part came to India. So she was born in Dhaka and she migrated to India in the 1930s at a very young age. She was born in 1926. So most of her studies were in India. I mean, all of her studies. She studied at various schools. She had only a brief schooling in Bangladesh, Dhaka, at a very young age when she was a child. Afterwards, she studied. The rest of her studies were in India, mostly in Kolkata. So, what was Mahaswetha Devi doing apart from writing all these works? She was actively involved in the struggles of the Adivasis, as I said. Okay. Uh, if you find her uh, involved in the land rights movement of Adivasis. Okay. So she lived in the Adivasi villages in West Bengal, Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh for several years. She joined her struggles for human rights, for land, for proper wages. Okay. And for a brief time, she taught in a college in Kolkata. Okay. And even while she was teaching, she was associated with workers, Dalits, Adivas. In fact, her whole life was a career in not only writing but also activism. And she was involved in the Nandigram agitation in 2010 when the left front government confiscated the land of farmers at a place called Nandigram and handed it over to big industrial houses for their factories. So this was an event which attracted large uh, protests from all over the India, and Mahaswetha Devi was in the thick of these projects. And as you know, because of this, she won several awards. So she won awards not only for her writing but also for her activism. She was a recipient of Padma Shri, one of the highest civilian awards in India. And she won the Sahitya Academy Award in 1979. She won the Jnanpith Award in 1996. And she won the Raymond Magsaysay Award, RAMON MAGSA YSA. Raymond Magsaysay was the president of Philippines, uh, a large, a huge figure in the Asian politics. So an award has been named after him. It goes to some professional or writer or activist or scientist in Asia who makes a significant contribution to society. So our Mahaswetha Devi was also recipient of that award, and her books are numerous. She wrote a biography of uh, Jhansi Rani called Queen of Jhansi. She wrote a novel called Hajar Chaurashirma, which means Mother of 1084, in the background of the Naxalite movement, when thousands of Naxalite activists were imprisoned, not only in Bengal but in many parts of the country. So this novel talks about the mother of a Naxalite prisoner whose prison number was 1084. Hajar Chaurashirma. Another novel called Aranyir Adhika, means right of the forest or right to the forest. So who has power? Who holds power over the forest? Her novellas. A collection of short stories called Murti, and a collection of short stories called Stanadaini. Stanadaini is the title story of a large collection of short stories published in 1979. Choti Munda, a collection of short stories. Choti Munda Ebang Tartir, it is called. You can easily get these names from any site, any biography of Mahaswetha Devi. And many of her stories were filmed. Stories and novels were filmed. A film called Sangarsh, 1968, based on one of her short stories, Laili Asmani Aina. Rudali is famous. Rudali is based on the life of a poet belonging to Kashmir. Rudali. So her story on this poet. As you know, she was also actively involved in women's movements, not only the movements of Dalits, workers or Adivasis, but also women's. Okay, and some of her stories actually involve issues of women's rights. Even our Sanadain story that we are going to discuss involves the life of a woman. How a women, what kind of life women in India lead. So this you can call the story a feminist text. So if you have looked at some of the material I sent you will realize that this is a proper description of the story. It can be called a feminist text. Okay. Not only that, other stories like Dopti, about an Adivasi woman who was molested by soldiers. So Rudali has been made into film. Bayan, which is a play by Mahaswetha Devi. This was made into film. Gangor, Ullas, some 7 films based on Mahaswetha Devi's work. She had a very eventful life. Okay, first marrying an activist of IPTA, Indian People's Theatre Movement. That was in her personal life is little known. So this she was married to this playwright called Bijon Bhattacharya. He was a member of the. He was not only a member but a founding father, one of the people who founded this movement, Indian People's Theatre Association, IPTA, IPTA. You'll find the name everywhere on sites which discuss Indian theatre. So we already saw that a writer like Tanveer Habib, author of Charan Das Cho, was a member of the IPTA, Indian People's Theatre Association, a left-wing theatre group patronized by the Communist Party of India. And Mahaswetha Devi's first husband, Bijon Bhattacharya, was one of the founding fathers. And she had a son by him called Nabarun Bhattacharya, who became a novelist and a critic. She worked in a college for some time and at a post office, but she was dismissed from her job in the post office because of her communist sympathies. Mahaswetha Devi started as a communist. Okay. Although in 2010 she was dead against the CPIM's policies in Bengal. She started as a communist. Many intellectuals in India in the middle of the century uh, were sympathizers of the communist movement. So our Mahaswetha Devi was also a sympathizer, and uh, she divorced her first husband and married a person called Asit Gupta. And in 1966, 76, she divorced Asit Gupta also. So afterwards, she was on her own. She was writing. She was uh, taking part in agitations. She was in the forefront of the struggles of Adivasis, Dalits, workers, and other marginalized sections of the country. And also, she was deeply involved in women's movements. So all these associations make her an organic intellectual. The kind of intellectual that Edward Said talked about. One who is actively involved, not just a person who sits in an armchair at his desk and writes fiction or articles, but actively involved, doing both things together, becoming writing and also taking part actively, physically involved in agitations. So she died in 2016, just 5 years ago, uh, due to a major heart attack, and she was 90 at the time of her death. And the noted filmmaker Ritik Ghatak was her uncle. Yeah, so it's a very enterprising, very renowned family that Mahaswetha Devi belonged to. Okay, so so you have now a profile of Mahaswetha Devi. What kind of a writer she was? What kind of an activist she was? So one of the rare breed of writers in India. There are very few women writers who can compare with Mahaswetha Devi. You our Kamala Das is probably not worth comparing with Mahaswetha. Kamala Das was not an activist. She was not an organic intellectual, as Edward Said would have called Mahaswetha Devi. Right. So let's look at the short story. Let's look at Stanadai. It's actually a very traumatic short story. Although the author or the translator, it is translated by um, a prominent critic and translator. This story. Uh, Probably you've heard of her. And she was also the translator of uh, Derrida's book of grammatology. Okay, so Gayatri Spivak is so well known even outside India, especially for her translation of Derrida's of grammatology. But in India, she is also known as the translator of this story by Mahaswetha Devi, Stanadayini. So it is narrated with sarcasm, the poignancy, the pathos of the story, you know, of a woman who had 20 children. Can you imagine? A woman who gave birth to 20 children. Not because she wanted it, but because she always had to have children. Because she nursed or breastfed the young children of a family of merchants, the Haldar family. So it's a very pathetic story, how And that's one reason why the heroine of the story, Yashoda, has been called Mother India. There is a film called Mother India where you find a, woman from a farmer family, okay, all sacrificing, uncomplaining mother who suffers for her children. The image of Mother India, okay, which you find in many texts and authors. But even our Bashir has written a story called Bharata Madhav. Right. So Stanadayini, the heroine of Stanadayini, uh, Jashoda, has been compared to uh, Mother India. Okay. So this is the story is actually astounding, incredible for people like us. We simply can't believe that such a thing can happen in real life. But Mahaswetha Devi was a writer who knew her people. So this must have been taken from a real life incident she had seen. Okay, the real life of a person she knew. Okay, so what is the situation like in the story? So in the middle of the story, the author tells us that as soon as you enter the Haldar household, Brahmin is called Haldar. Haldar is a caste. Brahmins, but considered to be a little low in the scale hierarchy, not very high born Brahmins. So the Haldar family was rich. They had enough business to feed hundreds of people. The elder Haldar had 13 children. Can you imagine? 13 children. And if you count their children also, the whole number would run to more than 100. But they had big business. And each child, if it was a daughter, she would be married off into rich families, rich and aristocratic families. The sons would be doing business of their own. And it was a big uh, house, body it was called, or Taravad as you call it in Malayalam. So it was this uh, body or Taravad that Jashoda worked. It was not Jashoda, I think the more important person was Jashoda's husband, Kankalicharan. Okay. So it was a typical upper caste Bengali household, Okay. Lots of children around. Okay. And even the young boys taking liberties with the housemates. It was allowed. It was considered their rights to flirt with or to force them into sex. As you read the story, you will find such incidents. Okay, it is very common, and the maids also took it in their stride, thinking it was normal. Okay, so in the case of Jashoda, who was a maid in the house, she was special. The other family had a certain respect for Brahmins. Okay, so whether you are poor or rich, you had to look uh, after Brahmins. If there are Brahmins in your house, you have to treat them with respect. You might pay them less, okay, but you have to treat them with a certain respect, sometimes touching their feet. So, Yashoda had, when the story begins, Yashoda has 3 or 4 children, okay, and her husband was also a very, what shall we say, a very amorous husband, okay, full of love and also sexual desire for his wife. So, at the beginning of the story, we learn, you can note all this, but that he loved to fondle her breasts. So, this is not an erotic statement. This has to do with the crux of the story. Why does the author say that? You learn as you read the story. So, when the story begins, a simple accident happens in the household. One of the senior elder sons, the third son, I believe, was fond of riding a two-wheeler. Okay, so it was there in the household. And he rode it at such speed that there was always a chance of an accident happening, and it happened. He ran over Kankali Charan's feet, and the feet could not be brought back to its former state, so he became limp. So this was an unexpected event which changed the fortunes of the family. So what happened? Kankali Charan was set up in a shop. Okay, and uh, food was sent to Kankali Charan's home, Jashoda's home also. Their children had a good time. Okay, because Haldar believed that his son was responsible for Kankali Charan's fate, causing an accident, making him limp. So they had they were treated like Brahmins who had to be respected. Okay. So while this was going on, suddenly there was a problem in the family. Uh, you must think of what happens in a typical Savarna family in Bengal. You know, I think you know something about Bengali Savarna families. Bengali Brahmins eat fish. Only the widows are forbidden from eating fish. Okay. Then they of course they make up for it by taking lots of milk, eating sweet meats. You know, Bengali sweets are famous the world over. You know, you heard of rasgulla, rasmalai. All these are Bengali sweet dishes. So, uh, as I said, in the middle of the story, the author says that as soon as you enter the Haldar household, you are back in the 16th century. Such old-fashioned beliefs held sway, such as this Brahmin worship, for example. And there was a temple nearby. Okay, Durga temple. Okay, Ma or Durga, Mother Durga was universally worshipped, and Kangali Jaran had also some hand in the running the temple, but another person, his rival, another Brahmin, took over, and he did not allow Kangali Jaran to share any of the proceedings he got from the temple. There were pilgrims visiting the temple all the time. And this Durga at the temple was considered to be the patron goddess of the Haldar family. Okay. Now, what happens? In the household, as you know, it was, as the author said, it was like the 16th century. Every couple had 10 or more children. No family planning, nothing. So they had, the women had a problem. They had to constantly nurse children. Okay. And a child would be born every 1.5 years. Okay. So their body shape will suffer. Okay. So suddenly somebody had an idea. They always found Jashoda with children. You know, this was her third or fourth child, and she looked so healthy. So the mother of the family, the Mrs. Haldar, thought, why not ask Jashoda to feed the young children in the family, so their mothers could keep their shapes. Okay, they would still look attractive for their husbands. Okay, so Jashoda was employed as the official breast giver, Stanadai, and she did it for years. So how could she do it? She could do it only if she herself had children. So Kankali Charan was asked to have sex. He didn't need any asking. So Jashoda continued to have children year after year. So she was always a mother. Okay, and she had milk in her breast, which her children and the children in the Haldar household drank. And the mothers of the children in the Haldar household did not have the responsibility of feeding their children. They could remain attractive to their husbands. So see how inhuman this relationship is. How inhumanly Jashoda is being treated by the elder family. But this went on. They didn't. think anything was strange about this. They thought it perfectly normal to have a woman to feed their children, a woman like Jashoda, perpetual mother. So this went on. This went on for years, and Kakkuzhi-Maliakkal continued to run his shop. Okay, and Jashoda had 20 children. She gave birth to 20 children, and she nursed or breastfed dozens of children in the Haldar household. Okay, so this is, and the author makes a comment in between. The Haldar household also had a Goshala where very fat cows from Bihar were uh, fed and husbanded. Okay, and their duty was also to give milk, but not like Jashoda. So see how a human being becomes virtually an animal. This is the crux of the story. So Jashoda could not look after her own children much. Some of them grew up. Some of the daughters were married off into good families by both uh, Kakkuzhi-Charan's influence as a Brahmin and also by the help of the Haldar household. The sons were employed here and there. Okay, they managed to look after themselves, but they had no love for their own mother. And when Mr. Haldar died, okay, things changed a little, and Mrs. Haldar still looked after Jashoda, but the attachment waned. And when she also died, okay, things changed. Her daughter-in-laws did not want to continue the arrangement. They had grown up now. Many of the sons had left the body. They had their own houses in different parts of Calcutta, and there were just a few daughters-in-laws. Finally, there was only one in the household. So Jashoda lost her status as a Standaini. There were no children in the household, and she was asked if she could continue as a maid in the house, but not the old respected Stanadai. So she continued there, and she had to uh, sleep with the other maids, in the same room. She got none of the respect she had got earlier as a Brahmin. And then it came as a shock that she had breast cancer. Yeah. So, and the daughter-in-law of the family did not bother to treat her much. She just gave her some medicine, some Ayurvedic medicine or homeo medicine, and it got worse. Okay, and there were uh, shards. Uh, there were pus was coming out from her breast. Okay, and uh, there was inflammation in her breast. So they had to finally think of admitting her to a hospital. Okay, which they finally did. By the time it was worse, if she had been treated earlier, she could have survived, but she didn't. So she was, by this time something else happened. Kakkuzhi-Maliakkal got a woman to be his keep. That was the work of the other Brahmin in the temple. Okay, probably it was his daughter or some relative. And at that age, he only needed looking after. Okay, nothing else. Probably not sex. But then he completely ignored Jashoda, his wife of more than 40 years. Okay, who had given birth to 20 of his children. Okay. So at the hospital, uh, a couple of times her children visited her. Then nobody visited her at the hospital. Kakkuzhi-Maliakkal almost forgot about her. The son-in-law of Haldar's son, he visited her a couple of times, and he too stopped visiting her. And Jashoda died at the hospital. The hospital tried to ring up the Haldar family, but either they didn't take the phone or it was out of order. So Jashoda became an unclaimed corpse in the hospital. Okay, without uh, anybody to claim her body. So her body was cremated in the public crematorium. And as we know, she thought of herself as a Brahmin from the beginning to the end. Only thing is, now in the hospital, she was in a coma. She lost control of herself. She no longer was conscious of her surroundings. So she didn't even know when somebody from the Haldar family visited her. And she was cremated by Dalits. Can you imagine? In real life, she would not have allowed them to touch her. Now, at this last moment in her life, she was cremated by Dalits at the crematorium. So this here entered a very traumatic uh, life of a woman. A woman who by birth belonged to the highest echelons of Brahminhood, who was respected as a Brahmin, like her husband, and ended up in a crematorium as an unclaimed corpse. Okay. Now, here in this story, as the author said, you'll think you are in the 16th century. Okay, Brahmin worship, you know, everything as it always had been. One would think in tradition, nothing has changed. Although the author tells us that the last part of the story happened after 1947. Yeah, this was independent India. Okay, and but things had not changed, and the crossing of caste and class in the novel is also remarkable. Okay. On the one hand, you have a hierarchy of castes, the Brahmins occupying the top slot, and the uh, next caste, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Shudras. You also have another social stratification, that of class. So if you look at class, Jashoda had become an impoverished woman by the time of her death, not a privileged Brahmin. So this play of caste against class. The Haldar family were also Brahmins, but they were of a lower category of Brahmins, not as privileged as Jashoda's family. Okay. Now this play of caste against class and this entire matrix of Bangla social life, where tradition still had, where you still had 10 or 12 children in the family, where modernity had not arrived. So you can look at the story as Mahaswetha Devi's way of telling us that modernity had not arrived in Bengal, at least in parts of Bengal. That tradition continued. Now you can also compare this with what is happening in our own state. I think you have all seen the film Great Indian Kitchen. How tradition continues. How if you have your periods, you cannot cook in the kitchen. How you have to use traditional implements for cooking, like your grindstone, ammi. Okay, how the food grow um, the ingredients which are ground on a grindstone are considered more tasty than what you grind in a mixie. How you have to uh, go for traditional cooking with firewood instead of by cooking gas. So Everywhere in India, there is uh, this expected but never realized arrival of modernity. So Bengal was the same. By the time when this story was written, sometime in the 1970s, it was translated into English later. So Bengal had not changed. Even today, if you go to the Bangla countryside, you will find all these social distinctions very strong. Caste, okay, feudal relationships, low wages, everything, everything that you expect to find in an underdeveloped Asian country, you will find in Bengal. So Mahaswetha Devi's story is, on the one hand, about the uh, traditional marginalization of women. It is not just marginalization; it is a sheer cruelty. How a woman can be exploited like a machine. She is just a milk-giving machine, Sanadai, and how her life drags on and on. And the interesting thing is that she never complains. She is worried only when she finds that she has got this dreadful disease, incurable disease. Till then she is quiet and she loves her husband also, despite the fact that he is not worth the name husband. So, despite that she loves tradition. She is very anxious about the statue in the bust of the goddess in the temple. So one day somehow the head is turned back. It is actually the pujari's mischief, but people think it's a miracle. So all these things she experiences and takes as part of her tradition. Looking after the Haldar children, no complaints. Okay, her incredible faith in fate. Okay, everything will happen as it is willed by the goddess. Okay, so the story is on the one hand about Indian motherhood, Indian women. So the other day you listened to a presentation by one of your classmates, Srishma. She was telling you about this, how motherhood is imposed upon women, right? But here, that is nothing compared to what happened to Jashoda. Remember, if she was talking about a woman who went for fertility treatment for conceiving, because a childless woman was considered to be a bad woman, okay, not a full woman, etc. Here you are talking about a woman who gave birth 20 times, who suckled, breastfed more than 50 children. So doctor is shocked when he learns that Jashoda's breast cancer might be due to her feeding so many children. 50. They count the number of children who were breastfed. The final number was 55. 55 children from in the Haldar household alone, and her own children. Okay. So here it is not just a question of a middle class family laying some kind of a stigma on a woman who does not become a mother. Here motherhood is forced upon a hapless woman like Jashoda, a woman who has to keep on giving birth to children so that she could feed the children in the Haldar household. Okay. And the total indifference with which uh, men treat women, not only men treating women, how people treat the poor and the downtrodden, a certain kind of perpetual selfishness with which you look at poor people, underprivileged people. The author makes it a point of telling you that. Okay. How you look at people who suffer, how you are unmoved by human suffering. Okay. The sheer inhumanity of your attitude. That's what is striking in the story. That's why Mahaswetha Devi is one of our prominent writers, because of her championing of the underprivileged. On the one hand, women, on the other, Adivasis, Dalits, okay, all the underprivileged sections of society. And of course, as a category, as if you take gender as your criterion, then women are the most underprivileged sections of society, as the story tells you. And it is probably true to say that the story represents, Jashoda represents Indian womanhood, Bharata Mata, Mother India. Because this is the kind of state that Mother India is today in. Okay, trampled upon, exploited, ignored. So when you look at the story, you feel that this is an iconic story, something, a story which is placed right at the center of the discourse on gender equality. Right. So please read the story over and over again if you want to discover more things in the story. Okay. How what happens in a stratified society where there are upper caste and lower caste, where there are rich and poor people. How human suffering knows no bounds, and how people are indifferent to human suffering. Not that suffering happens, but there is no sympathy for the downtrodden. There is uh, no concern for their lives. So please go through the story and get back to me if you have any queries. Thank you.